What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, and today, giving you guys another update on the New York Giants head coaching search. Of course, there was big news yesterday. The New York Giants went ahead and fired defensive coordinator Shane Bowen. Charlie Bullen stepping in as the interim defensive coordinator. We're going to dive a little deeper into him in tomorrow's episode and some of the episodes forthcoming as we lead into Monday Night Football versus the Patriots this upcoming week. But before we get into all of that, we do have some interesting information that continues to be released about the Giants head coaching search from multiple different sources, and all of them are connecting the Giants to one particular name, that name being Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. So Lou Anarumo was mentioned by Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post yesterday as he tweeted this out. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you all to see. Ryan Dunleavy said, Anarumo is the slight favorite for the New York Giants head coaching position right now. This was in response to a guy going by the username Takes by Nate, who follows me. Follow back. Why not? Don't sleep on the importance of this, which is GM Joe Schoen's connection to defensive coordinator Charlie Bullen. So let's start there. I said I was going to dive into that in tomorrow's episode, but I think it's important context to discuss right now. So Charlie Bullen is the interim DC for the New York Giants, but prior to that, he was the outside linebackers coach with the New York Giants for the last two seasons. Now, prior to that, many years ago, he worked under Vance Joseph when Vance Joseph was the defensive coordinator of the Miami Dolphins. While he was with the Miami Dolphins, guess who else was with the Miami Dolphins? Of course, Joe Schoen used to work in the Miami Dolphins front office. So while Joe Schoen was in the Miami Dolphins front office and Charlie Bullen was on the sidelines for the Dolphins, apparently they became good friends. That's also according to Josina Anderson. She reported yesterday that Bullen and Schoen, very close, good friends. And that helped Charlie Bullen get the promotion to interim defensive coordinator over some of the other guys who are on the New York Giants defensive coaching staff. For example, there are coaches on the staff who have been defensive coordinators before. Top example and choice being Marquand Manuel, defensive backs coach this season. He was the defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons in 2019, so he has called plays and ran an entire defense before. Charlie Bullen has no such experience, so the Giants passed over experienced prospects for the interim defensive coordinator position, went with a relative unknown and an inexperienced, actually a guy who has no experience running that position in Charlie Bullen. Of course, speculation here. Well, he's friends with Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen is a very involved general manager. Seems like maybe Joe Schoen promoted Charlie Bullen himself. And then you add in a second piece of information, another detail. Well, that detail being that Mike Kafka, when he spoke to the media yesterday, said that he did consult with general manager Joe Schoen before making the decision to promote Charlie Bullen. So that very much felt like a promotion handed from the general manager. So why is that relevant to the Lou Anarumo discussion? Because of Lou Anarumo and Joe Schoen's connection during their shared time in Miami. They developed a friendship back then the same way that Joe Schoen and Charlie Bullen developed a friendship back then. And Anarumo has ties to the organization, not just through Joe Schoen and his time with the Miami Dolphins, but also Anarumo used to be the defensive backs coach of the New York Giants in 2018 and has a lot of friends still left within the organization because despite the Giants losing over the last nearly 10 years, they haven't changed a lot inside the organization. So there's a lot of familiar faces who still know and respect Lou Anarumo from his time with the team. And that's why we're going to dive into this conversation about familiarity hires. The Giants hiring guys that they're familiar with, how they keep doing this, and how it seldom works out for them, and my gripe with it. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but more context on Charlie Bullen and Lou Anarumo. So Charlie Bullen, like I said, Josina Anderson also reported that that was a friend of Joe Schoen. Well, how about this report as well? So I mentioned that Ryan Dunleavy tweeted out how Lou Anarumo is the slight favorite for the head coaching job, as you see on the screen right there. That ties in with him saying, don't sleep on the importance of Joe Schoen and Charlie Bullen's connection. What he's trying to say is don't sleep on Joe Schoen and Lou Anarumo's connection. That's why he's the slight favorite. And that was seemingly corroborated today by Josina Anderson as she reports that a league source says the Colts defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo is expected to receive strong consideration for the Giants head coach vacancy this upcoming cycle, while also emphasizing his familiarity and relationship with current general manager Joe Schoen. It remains to be seen how much said connection will influence ownership relative to Schoen's status once the search is complete. But it is important to note, everybody, that Joe Schoen has the vote of confidence from ownership. When ownership decided to fire head coach Brian Daboll, they also decided to make it clear that Joe Schoen was running the search for the next head coach. And now we're hearing all these different things about how Schoen is safe, how Schoen is beloved within the organization, how ownership thinks so highly of him. And if all of that is true, and he is indeed running this head coaching search, because of all the connection and familiarity hirings that the organization has made in the past and that Schoen has made in the past, Lou Anarumo is early here emerging as the favorite for the New York Giants head coaching job. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys my takes on Lou Anarumo as well. But first, I want to just kind of talk about, there's a word that gets thrown around. It gets thrown around a lot when discussing the New York Giants, and that word is nepotism. Now, nepotism is usually used to kind of discuss what's going on in the Giants ownership because they are a family business. They're owned by a family. And so there's a lot of family members who get promotions and hold high ranking front office positions. Of course, you guys know who I'm talking about. John Mara owns the team, but his brother Chris Mara is really involved with this head coaching search. His nephew, or is it son-in-law, Tim McDonnell, is director of player personnel. All of these family members work crucial positions, high-ranking positions at the top of the team. The family runs the team, essentially. And so that's where a lot of Giants fans throw around the word nepotism, and that's valid. But I take it a step further because nepotism, by definition, is not just about family members getting hired. A lot of people talk about somebody got their kid a job or somebody got their cousin a job. It's not just that. The word is actually, by definition, applicable to friends. It's friends and family members. And what the New York Giants have been for the last 10 years, ever since Tom Coughlin was relieved of his duties, is a nepotism-based organization. What do I mean by that? Well, Jerry Reese was fired in 2017, and who replaced him? John Mara's friend, Dave Gettleman, a guy who had familiarity with the organization. Ernie Accorsi's friend, Dave Gettleman. He hadn't worked for the organization previously, I don't think, but he had worked elsewhere, and he did work with the organization prior. But Gettleman essentially got that job because of familiarity, because he is a friend, right? And then the hirings that have kind of happened since then. Let's think about the Joe Judge hiring in 2020. Why did he get that job? Because he got a great vote of confidence from Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick being somebody who has ties to the organization and is friends with people still in the front office. So once again, a familiarity hiring, a nepotism-based hiring. So let's take it another step further. Brian Daboll gets hired in 2022. Why? Because he had the Bill Belichick vote of confidence, the seal of approval from the great friend, Bill Belichick. So it's not just Dave Gettleman. It's not just Joe Judge. It's not just Bill Belichick. It's everybody that the Giants have hired recently for the last 10 years almost. They're all guys who have prior connections to the organization. I understand this is a networking business. This is a people business, the NFL is. This is more of who you know than what you know many times. But the Giants rely on who they know, in my opinion, far too often for a team that's been bad for this long. When you've been bad at something for 10 years, to me, the last thing that you should do is continue to go back to the people who contributed to this mess. And that's what the Giants seem to do. First and foremost, they went to with the Joe Judge hiring, they went to Bill Belichick. They got that hiring wrong. Then they went back to Bill Belichick for another head coaching recommendation. Okay, now they're not going to go back to Bill Belichick anymore, I would assume, right? But who knows? But they shouldn't have gone back to him in the first place. They moved on from Jerry Reese. So instead of turning a new leaf and starting a new era for this organization, what do? Well, they go all the way back to Ernie Accorsi and say, who's your best friend? That's who we're going to hire. They don't look forward. They're always looking past. They're always looking backward. They're always looking into the past. That's why the top favorites for the position right now, it's not Chris Shula, it's not Mike McCarthy, it's not any of these other guys like Jeff Hafley. It's Lou Anarumo, who used to work for the team and who's friends with Joe Shane. And it's Steve Spagnuolo, who used to work for the team and who's friends with John Mara and other guys in ownership. That's who the top two candidates are right now. But again, this is not me saying any of these things to discredit Lou Anarumo, to discredit Steve Spagnuolo, or any of these guys. Anarumo's a good coach. He's had a lot of success. He's been an NFL defensive coordinator for 7 years. That doesn't happen by accident. I'm not trying to discredit him. And by no means am I trying to discredit Steve Spagnuolo. I think he would be a pretty good candidate for the job. But on the same token, the Giants are so stuck in their ways and so stuck in the past. And of all the teams in the NFC East who get ridiculed for this or that, even the Cowboys, for example, Cowboys get ridiculed a lot because, they haven't won Super Bowls in a long time, but they have had a lot of regular season success. And when things start to get stagnant, think about with Jason Garrett, do they just take on a guy who they know from a long time ago and then make him the head coach? No, they went outside of the box. They hired Mike McCarthy, a former head coach who needed a change of scenery. Then they won 12 games in 3 straight seasons. They found regular season success. The Giants, I'm bringing this up because the Giants haven't had any regular season success outside of 2 blips over the last 10 years, being the 2016 season and the 2022 season. Outside of that, they've had no regular season success. They have the worst record in the NFL since 2017. Since 2017, that's when this wave of looking into the past and making hirings based on who your friends recommend really hit this organization hard, because after the 2017 season, that's when they went ahead and they hired Dave Gettleman. That's, of course, a couple seasons later, they kept Dave Gettleman. They hired Joe Judge because Belichick recommended him. Then a few seasons later, they hired Dable because Belichick recommended him. So you guys see where I'm going with this. They don't go outside of their tree. They don't go outside of their bubble of familiarity. But this is a team that's won only 42 games since 2017. Tom Brady has more wins than the New York Giants since 2020. Tom Brady retired 3 seasons ago, and he has more career wins since 2020 than the New York Giants. That's how often this team loses football games. That's how rare it is for them to win games. And so again, why wouldn't you want something different? Why would you want to do the same thing over and over when it's clearly not working? Why would you want the same people running the show? Why wouldn't you want to clean house and start over and turn a new leaf and bring in fresh new blood? That's what I don't understand. And that's why reports like this frustrate me, because it's not about Lou Anarumo. He could get hired and he could be a great head coach. And you know what? Then maybe I'll eat crow. That's fine. But it's really about the fact that the Giants don't leave their bubble. And that's why they keep losing. That's why they keep failing. That's why they get stuck like they have been for the last 10 years, because they're stuck within this bubble. And I really want to see them break out of this bubble. When I see Chris Shula is a top name for the job, I get excited because he doesn't have obvious connections to the organization. He's young, he's up and coming, but he's from a really successful coaching tree, and he's been a great coach for years now. That's exciting to me because it's outside of this Giants bubble. When I hear Mike McCarthy, that's also exciting to me because it's outside of the Giants bubble. It's a proven head coach with a track record. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been to the playoffs a bunch, won a ton of regular season games, and he's not stuck within the dogma of the New York Giants thinking. So that's what I'm trying to get at here, is that the Giants always look to hire the guys that they know best rather than the guys that are most qualified for the position. And that's always been my problem with John Mara. And I actually give a lot of respect to John Mara. I think at the end of the day, he's a fan of the New York Giants. He inherited the team. Like I said, it's a family business because he inherited it. So, he's always just been a fan. And that's why he gets very reactionary like fans do. And he makes decisions that fans make because he is a fan. So I give respect to John Mara. I don't think it's easy for him to run this team. And also, of course, with everything he has going on in his personal life, I'm praying for him. I want to see him pull through, and I want to see him continue to be the owner of the New York Giants. I just want him to recognize that the New York Giants are not the team that he fell in love with as a kid. They're not the team that he became a fan of. The NFL has changed, the world has changed, and the Giants have changed. And it's time for ownership and the front office to change with the rest of those changes. Make changes that match the times that we're in. So just kind of, diving deeper into Lou Anarumo. When you compare him to some of these other head coaching candidates, what convinced the New York Giants that he is the best suited man for the job? When he was with the Cincinnati Bengals, his defense rather, ranked 25th in points allowed, 29th in yards allowed in 2019. They went 22nd in points, 26th in yards in 2020. They improved to 17th in points and 18th in yards in 2021. And then they went all the way up to 6th in points and 16th in yards in 2022. That's, of course, those 2 years were when the Bengals were really good. Then it all came crashing down. 21st in points allowed, 31st in yards allowed in 2023. 25th in points allowed, and 25th in yards allowed in 2024. He's never been an elite defensive coordinator. He's never coached an elite unit. And now with the Indianapolis Colts, while they do rank top 10 in points allowed, they rank 23rd in total yards allowed. Teams are driving the football up and down the field against them many times. And I don't think that defense, considering how much talent they have on paper, is actually achieving as great as it should be. That Colts team should honestly be doing better. They're kind of faltering now at 8-3. But again, what it really comes down to for me is Anarumo's familiarity with the organization. It might be a top selling point to the organization, to the Giants' top decision makers. But I know that it's not to the Giants fans, because we don't want somebody that just has familiarity with the team getting the job. We want somebody who is most qualified for the team getting the job. And that's really my big question here. So, are they bringing him in? Are they bringing in a new culture? Are they trying to? Or are they trying to replicate an outdated model that they fell in love with over a decade ago? That's my question. You want to bring and build a new culture in the locker room? Or do you want to try and reinstill a culture that you had in 2007? You know what? The world is different from 2007. NFL players are different. Contracts are different. Coaches are different than it was back then. But the Giants seem to love to fall back into those glory days and try and replicate it, but it's just not possible. You have to adapt. You have to move forward. Look at the New England Patriots. They tried to do the glory days thing with the hiring of Gerard Mayo. They said, you know what? He used to play under Belichick. He just coached under Belichick. We're going to give him the head coaching job and see how that goes. That didn't work, so they fired him after a year. And now I know that Mike Vrabel, of course, used to also play under Belichick, but his coaching style and his coaching style and culture is completely different from what Belichick's was. They overhauled pretty much all of the operations within that Patriots building, which is one of the reasons why Bill Belichick hates them now. So because they tore everything up and rebuilt it with Vrabel. And furthermore, I wonder, these other head coaching candidates, let's talk Hafley, let's talk Shula, let's talk McCarthy, whoever your favorite is, are they going to be weighed on the same scale as Lou Anarumo? Or is Lou Anarumo going to get more weight behind him just because he's friends with general manager Joe Schoen? And I don't think that's right if that's what's going to happen here. The Giants need to hire the most qualified candidate for the most qualified candidate for the position, not the man they are most familiar with. That's how I feel about it. So this kind of turned into like a passioned rant here. Honestly, I was just ranting for the last 15 minutes or so, but just kind of catching up on the news and connecting the dots here. I don't want the New York Giants to just decide on Lou Anarumo way early in advance and say, you know what, we're familiar with him. He knows our culture. He knows he's a Staten Island native. That's who we're going to hire. That doesn't make sense to me. I want the best possible coach. I don't want the coach that's closest with the general manager that I don't think should be here. The Giants, the ownership thinks Joe Schoen should be here another year at least. I look at a team that's gone 2-8 to start 3 consecutive seasons and say the general manager is definitely responsible for a lot of that. I know he's not responsible for all of it. I know Brian Daboll did a terrible job, especially the last 2 years. I understand that Daboll deserved to be fired. I advocated for the relieving of his duties. But you can't just completely separate the work of the GM and the coach. This roster is not perfect. The process this offseason was not perfect. There was flawed process. I mean, the Giants' big money signing at quarterback is now a healthy scratch QB3, that being Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was a healthy scratch QB3 the last 2 weeks because the New York Giants built an offense around a different quarterback and then tried to plug him into it. It wasn't a coaching problem. It was a misevaluation problem from the front office. And there's other examples of that. Why is Jalen Hyatt still on this roster? He doesn't play. And when he does, he's terrible. Why was Evan Neal on this roster for so long? What was the Graham Gano situation about? There are a lot of mistakes that Joe Schoen did make. Yeah, he made some good moves. He brought in some good young talent through the draft the last 2 years. prior to that, there were some big and obvious misses, especially in 2023. He is not some can't miss slam dunk general manager. And I just don't get the sense that he has such impeccable connections around the league that he needs to be kept for this head coaching search. He hired Brian Dable. Should he not be held accountable for that hiring? That's a miss on Joe Shane's resume, is it not? I think it should be. I don't know. I'm not totally out on Joe Shane either. If the Giants start winning some games, look better down the stretch here, the roster looks better with new coaching, I'll say, hey, you know what? Maybe Joe Shane did build a good roster and Dable just didn't know what to do with it. But I mean, 2 games later, Dable's gone. Giants are 0-2 in these games. Yeah, they're fighting for Kafka, but they're still failing to close out games the same way that they were under Dable. I'm still seeing the defense not able to stop the run. And I know people want to chalk that up to coaching. It's not just coaching. There's other issues in that defense that are from the roster standpoint. So I just feel like giving Joe Shane full autonomy to hire his friends is malpractice. It's just not the way that the New York Giants should be operating this head coaching search. This is a crucial one. Okay, Jackson Dart is a star in the making. Do not squander his potential. Do not squander the opportunity to attract a top head coaching candidate because you want your GM to hire the friend that he's closest with. That's where I'm coming from with this. So I have a great level of concern about this New York Giants head coaching news. The fact that you have 2 separate reporters out of nowhere saying that Lou Anarumo is the current favorite for the job. Lou Anarumo is not nearly as qualified as Shula to me, as Halfley to me, as McCarthy, as Jesse Minter. I mean, there are a lot of coaches that I will put well above Lou Anarumo, and I think most fans, most analysts, most reporters would too. But the Giants are going to weigh Anarumo on a different scale because he's friends with the GM and used to work for the team. That's not right to me. That's just hiring based on familiarity. And I'm tired of the Giants doing that. I think the Giants have done that too much. And I think every time they do that, it comes back to bite them in the end. So to wrap things up, no more familiarity hires. I don't like familiarity hires. I don't want a guy getting hired because he's friends with somebody. I want a guy getting hired because he's the best man for the job. So the New York Giants' number one goal needs to be to go out there and find the best man for the job. If after that process they feel genuinely like Lou Anarumo is the best man for the job, okay, so be it. But I have a hard time believing that. I think that there are better guys for the job who do not have connections to this losing organization. Because again, they're talking about bringing in guys that are familiar with the guys who helped contribute to this team falling from grace over the last 10 years. I mean, think about what kind of organization we were viewed as from 2005 to 2015. Prestigious, incredible organization with a couple Super Bowls mixed in that time span. One of the best organizations and franchises in the sport. Now, complete and utter embarrassment. Coach killing organization. Talent wasting organization. That's how the Giants have been viewed for the last 10 years. So I don't want guys who've been involved and contributed to that mess over the last 10 years hiring other guys who helped contribute to that mess for the last 10 years in major positions. That's my take on it, and I think I've made that point, and I think I'm repeating myself now. So I am going to go ahead and end this episode, guys, but I really want to hear your thoughts on it down below because I'm sure many of you feel the same way that I do, that this is kind of a nepotism line of thinking, that this is a familiarity kind of hiring that, you know, I know many of you feel the same way I do. So definitely drop your thoughts down below in the comment section. And hey, if you have a differing opinion, I'm open to it. Of course, you guys know I love to hear all different opinions. I love to debate. I love to open my mind and change my mind. Maybe in 2 months, all of a sudden, I think Lou Anarumo is, the best guy for the job. That's totally possible. Maybe I need to watch more of his interviews. Maybe I need to hear him speak. Maybe I need to hear about how he did in his interviews, who he's got lined up for offensive coordinator and things like that. Maybe I need to hear more or research more. Totally possible. But the research that I did today led me to believe that this would not be a hiring based on merit, but it would be a hiring based on familiarity. And that's what I want the New York Giants to stop doing, is hiring based on familiarity. But that's just my take on it, guys. I'm curious to hear yours down below in the comment section. Make sure you leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. And again, leave those thoughts below in the comment section. If you listen to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review and go ahead and follow us on all our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go New York Giants.
Perfect.